Hi everyone, it's Ajanette and I am here to orient you to SPSS. So I actually have SPSS on my computer. You will open it through the MSJC app stream. I'm going to demo it on my computer and just orient you to it. I have a little bit older version, but it's the same interface. Nothing's really changed on its facial surface. There are some additional functionality options behind the scenes, but those are well outside the scope of this class anyway. So I'm going to introduce you to the basics of SPSS. When you open up a screen, when you open up the program, it's going to ask you about what you want to do. I always just kind of cancel out this window. Unless you're importing a data set, you would follow the instructions that are provided in Canvas. But otherwise, I just cancel out and it'll open up to a brand new default blank data set. If you've worked in Excel or any other kind of spreadsheet program, then this looks familiar. It's just a spreadsheet, so I don't want you to be intimidated by it. Now I want to draw your attention down here to the bottom. There's two different views in the spreadsheet. There's a data view and there's a variable view. Now, I always start with the variable view because this is where we set up the variables that we're going to be working with. So statistics applies to quantitative research, where we have numerical values assigned to our data, right? And our data is either nominal, interval, ordinal, ratio data. And we need to kind of tell SPSS what those variables are, what type of data that it is, so it knows how to work with that information, how to work with those numbers. And so that is what you do in the variable view. You kind of program SPSS by introducing your variables, your name of your variable, any coding, so on and so forth. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Additionally, this data view over here is actually where you input the raw data. So what's really interesting is as you are setting up your variables, each row represents a different variable. And you always are going to have at least two variables that you're examining, right? One that's going to be the grouping variable, which is often your independent variable for an experimental study, right? It's how we determine the groups that we're comparing, okay? Sometimes that group is comparing one group of people to another group of people. We might be comparing social majors to psych majors. Sometimes it's comparing one measurement period to another measurement period. We might be measuring your depression before therapy and after therapy, right? So either way, we need to know the groups that are being compared. And so that's one variable. The second variable is what are we comparing? Maybe we're comparing success rates between psych and soc. Maybe we're comparing income levels between psych and soc. Maybe we're comparing depression levels before and after therapy. Maybe we're comparing self-esteem before and after therapy, right? So we just need to tell SPSS the groups being compared and what we're comparing. The other type of variable information that we might input in SPSS is what we call participant information or demographics. So whenever we're doing research, we want to make sure our sample is representative. Sadly, in psychology and a lot of social sciences, most of our research is drawn on white males. Well, I don't think like a white male. My body doesn't function like a white male. Our medical research has largely been done on white males. So when we talk about symptoms of a heart attack, they're appropriate for men, but what's commonly known as heart attack symptoms aren't really what women experience. So as researchers, we want to make sure that who we're conducting research on is representative of the population that we want to generalize that information to. If we're saying these are heart attack symptoms you need to watch out for, we need to be specific for men, for women, or for everyone. If it's for everyone, then in the sample, in the data set, there should be both men and women represented, right? So in addition to your grouping variable or your independent variable and your dependent variable or your measured variable, you also sometimes have data on your samples. So you have variables that might include our participant gender, our participant race or ethnicity, our participant age, our participant education level. And those may not be a focal point of our research, but they are in fact important. So we do input those into SPSS, and we get descriptive data on that so that when we're reporting out our information, we can describe what our sample looked like, and then the reviewers of that research can determine whether the sample is representative and whether it aligns with their particular population to determine whether or not our study has what's called external validity, or it can be generalized to other groups beyond those who participated specifically in our study. So that's kind of the information you would put in the variables. Now, when we talk about data, so each one of the variables, each one of these rows, so you have one variable per row. When you go to the data view, each one of those rows now becomes the heading of the column. So in this view, each variable is in a column, and each row represents a single participant. So this is where we put in what we call the raw data. This is where we put in the actual numbers that we took from the particular participants in our study, okay? So I'm going to give you kind of a general basic sample so I can show you how to input stuff, okay? And I'm gonna show you, I don't know, let's look at how much my children like ice cream, let's say, okay? So I'm going to show you here, we're going to say, and we're going to compare whether my boys or my girls like ice cream more, okay? So I'm going to say children's gender. Now, I want to make note a little bit. Let me go back. This column represents the name of your variable. Now, SPSS, remember how I said in the data view that that the variable becomes the column name? Whatever you put in this column is what will appear as the column name, okay? So this is how SPSS names your variables behind the scenes, okay? However, it does not allow spaces, special characters, anything like that. So notice I put child gender. And what I do is I capitalize each word, and that helps me read it more easily, okay? Now, as soon as you hit enter, SPSS is going to have a bunch of defaults it's automatically going to put in. Those are okay. The columns you need to focus on is the child name, is the name here, because that's what shows up in our data variable name. Then our label, I often just copy and paste the label, and I add my spaces. The label is what appears on our output, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. And then we have to focus here on measure. And this is where we have to tell it what scale of measurement applies. And so the scales of measurement are nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Nominal, they're different in name only. Ordinal, they are different in name, but they also can be ranked, like first, second, third place in a race. An interval is where not only are they different in name and they can be ranked, but the distances between those ranks is equal. So it's not like a race where it's first place came in maybe a minute ahead of second place, but second place only came in a second ahead of third place. Those distances between those ranks is equal, like age, right? The distance between 13 and 14 is the same as the distance between 14 and 15. So we're going to, and that's probably not the best example because that has a, well, okay, so we'll go with that. In any event, that is interval, and then ratio, and this is why I'm saying it's not the best example. Ratio is all of that criteria. It's interval, but it has a true zero. So what SPSS does is SPSS combines these last two, and interval and ratio are referenced as what's called scale data, okay? Scale data. Now remember I said that you're always going to have at least one variable that says what groups are being compared. So it's either your grouping variable or your independent variable. And then you're always going to have a variable that you're measuring, and that's what you're comparing between those two groups. So child gender, I'm going to compare how much they like ice cream between my boys and my girls. I only have cisgender children, so I only have two categories, boys or girls. Now, there's not any kind of ranking of those genders. There's not any kind of distinct and equal distances between the categories. They're different in name only, so that's a nominal variable. Whenever I have a nominal variable, I need to code the data. So I need to come back over here to values now. This column only becomes important for your grouping variables or your nominal variables. And you have to code your data. You have to say, okay, you click. Let me go back. When you click on this column or this cell, see this little square that pops up? You click on it and then this window emerges. And this is where you put in the coding or the labels for the values. So I'm going to give 1 to my boys, and I'm doing that because I had a boy first. And then I'm going to give 2 to my girls, okay? And I'm going to say okay. And now notice how these values pop in. And SPSS now will wait for me to tell them whether each participant is in group 1 or group 2, okay? Whether they're a boy or whether they're a girl. Now the other thing I said is I'm going to measure ice cream liking. Again, when you hit enter, it's going to put the default. Again, I'm going to copy and paste from my name to my label, but I'm also going to put in spaces. And now I have to come here to measure, and I have to say, well, what kind of data is this? Well, I'm going to ask them on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you like ice cream? And so that is going to be interval or ratio. It has a true 0. I mean, they can really say 0. I don't like it at all. So I'm going to say scale, okay? Now I'm going to go to data view. And I have 4 children, so I have 4 participants. And so I'm going to have 4 rows filled out. And I'm going to say, okay, my son, my oldest son, is a boy, and he doesn't like ice cream at all because he's lactose intolerant, has 0 tolerance for ice cream, and it hurts his stomach beyond measure. Then my next child is a girl, and although she also is lactose intolerant, she actually kind of likes ice cream, and so she pays the price, and everyone in the household does too. Then my next child is a boy, so it's a 1, and then the ice cream liking, let me see, Cole kind of likes ice cream. I'm going to give him a 7, so it's a 7 in this particular thing. Now, Kayla, oops, sorry, Kayla is a girl, so she's a 2, and then it's here, it's Kayla is a lover of ice cream. I'm going to say she's a 9, okay? And so I want to see, is there statistically significant differences in how much my boys like my ice cream compared to my girls? Now, there's always going to be differences, right? Like, who's taller than who? I am 5'9", my sister's like, 5'8 3/4". So we're different, but is it statistically significant, right? Does that 1/4 of an inch really matter? Well, that's what inferential statistics does. It allows us to see whether that difference is statistically significant, okay? So what I'm going to do, I have two groups. I'm comparing a dependent variable between different people in each group. And so this is what we call a t-test, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm always going to run a descriptive stats. And so what descriptive stats do is they can tell us, we can run frequency tables, and you'll learn about those in chapter 2. And we can run descriptive stats, which include our measures of central tendency and our measures of variability. And so how I did that is, this is how we input data. Now when we actually want to analyze, we go to analyze. I always start with descriptives. I use the frequencies, and I use that because I can get all the descriptives that I need in addition to the frequency tables. So I use them both. So this window pops up, and let's say I had 20 different variables. All 20 would be input here, okay? You have to tell it which variables do you want to work with. So I'm going to tell it these are the 2 variables I want to work with. Give me the descriptive stats. So I'm going to take mean, median, mode, which are our measures of central tendency. Measures of central tendency tell us how similar the data is to one another. Dispersion, measures of dispersion are also known as measures of variability, and that tells us how far apart or how different the data is from one another. So similarity, measures of central tendency. Dispersion, how far apart or different is the data. And then I'm going to tell it continue. And it defaults to the frequency tables. I don't always need them. I can go ahead and create charts. I can create bar charts or histograms. We use bar charts when the data is discontinuous, so different groups, nominal data. When the data is continuous data, so for scale data, it can be a histogram. So you have to kind of pay attention to what type of data you have. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And watch what's going to happen. Another window pops up. This now becomes my output window. See this right here where it says output. Over here, this is my data. So SPSS generates 2 separate files. A save file, which is your data file, and an output file, which it's called an SPV file, okay? And this is our output. Whenever you have an output window open and you're running analyses, SPSS will just continue to put that information right below your latest output, okay? And so this is telling me how many boys I had in my data set, how many girls I had in my data set. I had 4 people total. And it tells me how many of those participants scored a 7, or rated a 7, a 0, an 8, and a 9. So frequency tables are things you're going to learn about in Chapter 2. SPSS default ranks them from lowest to highest, but you're taught to rank them from highest to lowest, so know that. Now it's also giving me my measures of central tendency and my measures of variability up here for each variable. So again, if I had 6 variables, this table would be bigger and there'd be a column for all 6, and there'd be a frequency table for all 6. Now, when I'm talking about child gender, that's a nominal variable. So the mean and median do not make sense. Nominal variables are different in name only. They're just categorical. So typically the measure of central tendency that we report is the mode. We just say which group had the most, had the highest number of participants. Now, this is even, so this is even irrelevant, right? In that you could say this is bimodal and that both categories had it, or it really just doesn't matter because we had an equal number of people in both categories. But these other numbers just are nonsensical because it is nominal data. Now, because your measures of dispersion, your standard deviation and variance, are based on your mean, and if that's nonsensical, then these are nonsensical too. However, for scale data, those numbers mean something. So the average liking of ice cream is 6 for my children. The median is, which is our middle number, right, is 7.5. And you know, for the most part, I have an ice cream loving family. Mom's scores not on here, but mom would definitely rate a 10. So let me go ahead and now say, so that's our descriptives. Now I want to say, is there a statistically significant difference between my boys and my girls? So I'm going to go to Analyze. This is going to be Compare Means. This is going to be an independent sample t-test. You'll learn about t-tests later on. T-tests are when I have two groups that I'm comparing to one another. An independent measure t-test is when I have different people in each group. So in this case, I'm comparing boys against girls, and I'm looking at comparing the differences in a scale variable between two groups. So it's an independent samples t-test. And I'm going to say my grouping variable, which is your nominal variable, the groups that are being compared that we had to code, group 1 or group 2, that goes down here. So this one's highlighted. I'm going to hit this arrow to put it down here. I have to define my groups. I gave 1 and 2 as my values. And then I'm going to click on this one, and that becomes my test variable, or what I'm comparing between the two groups. I'm also going to click on Options, and you can see that it automatically gives you a confidence interval, which you'll learn about later on. We treat a confidence interval like an effect size. So our statistical test tells us whether or not there's a significant difference, and then our effect size tells us the magnitude of that effect. So is there a treatment effect, or is there a difference based on our independent variable or our grouping variable, and how big of a difference or how much impact did that have? So it's kind of like an earthquake, right? Where we first say, yes, there was an earthquake, and then what was the magnitude of that earthquake? The effect size tells us the magnitude, okay? And so we're going to hit continue. We can just use that 95% default. And so an effect size tells us, based on our sample, with a 95% confidence level, we project the corresponding population mean falls somewhere between these ranges, and it'll give us those ranges. I'm going to click OK. That output window pops up. Not only do I have the data that I had originally when I ran the descriptives, but now I actually have the analysis from my t-test, okay? And so now this becomes a your results right here, where my boys have an average just of my boys. Remember, up here, it tells me the average for my entire set of children, for all my offspring. It's 6. But my boys, the average is just a 3.5. My girls, it's an 8.5. So the t-test is comparing whether these two means are significantly different from one another. And we can see that by looking at this Levine's test for equality is when we want to see whether or not we met assumptions or criteria for the test. And for parametric stats, and this is going to be, this is a whole other language, but you'll learn what a parametric statistic is. We rely on population data, right? And we rely on assumptions. And one of those assumptions is there has to be equal variances between the groups we're comparing. So we don't want that. We don't want them to be significantly different from one another. And if they are, then we would default to the second row here. But right now, we didn't really run that analysis. So in this case, my t is negative 1.414. My significance is 0.293. And it actually is greater than 0.05. So even though those numbers look really far apart, there is not enough evidence to suggest that my boys or my girls like ice cream significantly more than the other. So there are not significant differences in ice cream liking between my two groups, my boys and my girls. That's likely because I only had 4 people. Small samples don't have enough power to detect statistical significance. So this is your output. And I want to give you really quickly, I'm just going to open a window here. So just ignore this for a second. I'm going to open a new Word doc. And I'm doing that because when you are working in SPSS through the app stream, you may not be able to save and retrieve a file later. And so honestly, I'm not sure yet how that plays out because we as faculty haven't been educated on that process yet. So I know in the prior access, students weren't able to save any kind of data files, so I'm going to assume that's the case. So what you want to do is you want to use whatever kind of tool you have to screenshot, or your Snippy if you're on a PC. I have what's called Snagit. So what I literally do is I literally just snag the images, and then I copy them, and then I paste them into my Word doc. And so there's my frequency tables. So if you're asked in a homework assignment to create frequency tables, then once you've done that and they show up in your output, then you just kind of screenshot those frequency tables and embed them into your homework assignment. I can do the same thing for my descriptive stats, right? And then I'm going to embed that. And then I can do the same thing for my t-test results. Now, I do want to say, when you're doing your SPSS homework assignments, I'm not just interested in knowing that you actually ran these things through, that you followed the step-by-step guide, you could actually run the technology, and you could get the output. Yeah, that's half the battle. I really want to know that you understand the output. So if you are turning in homework that's just copying and pasting your output, that's not going to be sufficient. I won't even give you 50% for that, because that's just a small, I said it's half the battle. I lied, sorry. It's a part of the battle. I really want you to understand what it all means. I want you to be able to explain it to me. So I want you to be able to tell me, well, even though we ran descriptive stats on gender, that doesn't, it doesn't really apply because gender is a nominal data, it's categorical, so the mean, the median, standard deviation, and variance are not applicable. Like, I want you to tell me those things, right? I want you to be able to say that you had 2 groups, boys and girls. You chose an independent measure t-test because you had 2 groups. Like, I want you to be able to tell me those things. And then I am actually going to teach you how to write your results consistent with APA format. And I'll give you a template, and I'll teach you how to write out your results. And that is incredibly important because we're not just teaching you statistics to know that you know how to run the math or do the computations. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in you learning how to use that information to answer research questions. And we don't have to focus as much on the computations because SPSS does it all for us. Click, 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 done, right? So what may take hours to hand calculate all this stuff, SPSS gets done in a heartbeat, right? And so that is the joy of SPSS. The downside of SPSS is it becomes yet another software or technology that we have to remember, okay, or we have to learn. This will be important. You'll learn it. You'll use this technology when you go on to research methods. If you're a psych major, you'll use this technology when you transfer. and you actually take additional classes from this point forward in statistics or research. And then you'll also use this in psychology. Almost all of our career options require a master's degree. So most definitely you'll use this technology as you start to prepare for master's research. And so that being said, we can, again, you may not be able to save it, but if you can save it, great. It'll save as an SPV file. Because you won't be able to open an SPV file unless you have SPSS on your computer or you have it open, then you can also consider printing it to a PDF. And sometimes that's helpful as well. So those are kind of my, so I print my stuff to a PDF. So those are my kind of tips and tricks for surviving SPSS. You will make sure that you are understanding what data you have, so you can make sure when you're in the variable view, you're giving SPSS the right information, right? You're giving it a name. Make the name as descriptive as possible, so that when it prints out on your output, you understand what it means, right? When it is a nominal variable, you're going to make sure you're coding it and you're telling SPSS what the category names are that it's comparing. When it is any kind of quantitative data, you're going to tell SPSS what type of quantitative data. You don't need to code it at that point. And then you're going to make sure that you have one line per participant, and every participant will have data for every variable included in your study. So that's kind of the gist of SPSS. It becomes a lot easier the more you do it. I will definitely have demonstration videos throughout the course teaching you how to run the analyses that are required for the course. So not only do you have this orientation video, but I am going to give you demonstration videos at every step along the way so that you know how to do each assignment that's required of you. But as always, I am here if you have any questions, so please reach out and let me know if you need some additional support, and I'm happy to pop on and help you out where I can. Take care, and looking forward to learning with you throughout the semester. And I need to figure out how to stop the recording.